This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. My name is Karen Beach, and this is the Journey Step by Step Christian Podcast. You know, what I love about having a relationship with God is that it is a relationship. And it took me a while to come to that because I was raised that you don't get mad at God, or you always have to be on your P's and Q's. But that's not the case. I mean, I'm going to go way out there, but trust me, I'm going to bring it back. I used to date a guy who I always had to walk on eggshells with. Everything I said, I had to be very careful not to use the wrong word, not to use the wrong tone. And to be honest, it wasn't that great of a relationship when that started happening, because what walking on eggshells did was it kind of influenced the level of honesty, the level of realness. It's hard to be real. It's hard to be honest when you can't be yourself, when you can't be who you are. And it took me a while to realize that God made me the way I am. He created me to be the person that I am. And if I'm upset, if I'm angry, God already knows what's in my heart. He knows I'm upset and angry. So why would I be anything other than upset and angry? And let him know how I'm feeling and why I'm feeling that way. God wants a relationship with us. So he wants to hear from us, you know, in the good times and the bad times and the confusing times. And our guest today is going to share an incredible testimony. Linda Plunkett actually had a tumor. She was diagnosed with a brain tumor in her frontal lobe that was the size of a tennis ball. Imagine having a tumor the size of a tennis ball. If you're going to get mad at God, that's probably a good time to get mad at him, because that seems so overwhelming. But her faith and having good people around her saved her. And I'd say having good people around, but God puts those people in our lives too, I think. So I could go on talking forever, you know that. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Linda Plunkett. Linda, welcome to the journey.
Thank you, Karen.
You know, and you have such an incredible story. When I first heard about it, I was like, she's got to be on one of my talking testimony episodes, because your testimony is powerful. So kind of start by telling me where you were, what your life was like before the diagnosis.
Well, actually, I tell people my life was very normal, and I actually was very healthy. I think that's why it was such a shock, because I really didn't have any type of major health issue and had a very active life, major medication for anything. You know, for 59 years old, I would say my health was above average. And even when I found out I had the brain tumor, I hadn't really noticed anything different or wrong. And so it was just such a shock to find out that I had a tennis ball sized tumor that was going to require immediate surgery.
And what was the diagnosis that the doctor gave you?
Well, it was called a meningioma. Now, there's good news and bad news about what I had. The good news was a meningioma is a non-cancerous tumor. It can come back, but basically it's non-cancerous. Now, having said that, I was having another issue, which I was having seizures. And my seizures weren't the kind of seizure where you fall on the floor and you have a fit or whatever. My seizure was, I was acting out in ways that people said, what is with her? There's something wrong with her. She's acting really different. But they said that was a form of a seizure. It was a brain seizure. And a brain seizure, just like any other seizure, can kill you. And so I had to have immediate surgery.
And you had to have that immediate surgery. And what did you tell the people in your life? What did you, I mean, how did you break that news to, your husband, your kids?
Well, it was interesting because the way that I found out, I had gone out to lunch with my son and a good friend who's a missionary to Guatemala. Her name's Sally. And this was late in the year, like late October back in 2012. And we came back from lunch and they were telling my husband, there's something wrong with her. She's not herself. She's not making sense what she's talking about. And of course, my husband never noticed. Unfortunately, husbands are sometimes the last ones to know, even though you're around them every day. People laugh when I say that, but it's true. And he said, well, you recognize me. You know who I am, and you know who the cat is. And what's really wrong with you? But they insisted, there's something wrong. So, I went to my family doctor because honestly, I was just seeing a family doctor maybe once a year for blood work. And she said, it's probably nothing, but you should go ahead and have an MRI just in case. So I had the MRI, and that's when they found the tennis ball tumor in my frontal lobe that was causing the strange behavior and, the form of seizure. And so that's pretty much how everyone found out. And I think I was just in such shock, You just, it's happening, but you want to believe it's not. And being a psychologist, a Christian psychologist, counseling people for 15 years, I couldn't be in denial. But having said that, it's like, maybe I'll wake up, maybe it's a bad dream. It is such a shock because you go from being in this great health, you think, to finding out that you're going to be having a brain surgery where you might not wake up alive.
Wow. Or you might wake up and Lord knows what would have happened, because.
Well, and when I woke up, it was very bad. Yeah, it was a bad outcome when I woke up. It was a very bad outcome. And, a part of me, a selfish part of me wished that I didn't wake up because the recovery was so long. And God was faithful for a while. I literally felt he had left me and I had a near-death experience. And at that point, I felt he rescued me and brought me back into my body. I knew he was there. But then I had to deal with feelings like, what did I do wrong, God? And I kept asking my husband, did I do something terribly wrong that this should happen to me? I didn't understand because for years I had helped people, done volunteer work and helped people on many different levels, mission trips, counseling, working in, for example, a crisis pregnancy center for a long period of time, working in a healing center. Many years, I felt I was serving God, and it just seemed so bizarre, and I couldn't see any good coming out of it. So I really went through two periods in my recovery that I was upset with God, and the main time was that initial time. But then I went through another time later when I developed fibromyalgia, which was much worse. I had pain all over my body. I couldn't sleep. That was about 8 months later. And I think that was even worse at that point. I became extremely upset with God at that point.
And when you were upset with God, how did you let him know that you were upset with him?
Well, I think initially people tried to comfort me. You didn't do anything wrong, but there were no answers. Sometimes when there's no answers, it's very frustrating. And I look back and now I understand why I went through everything I went through. But at that time, it made no sense. I didn't understand it. But I think when I got most upset was, I went to a major clinic in the area and my brain was really messed up. It was about 3 months later and they said, there's nothing we can do for you. And I cried out to God and I said, God, I cannot live like this. I cannot live feeling like I can't function and I'm not well and I can't go back to work. There's nothing I can do right now. But God, I felt like he gave me books. He gave me resources. I started to get better. But then about 8 months into the recovery, one morning I woke up, I had pain all over my body and I couldn't sleep. And that went on for quite a period of time. And so that particular time was worse. And, it's like, okay, it was bad enough going through the brain surgery and feeling I had no hope. And now I have pain. I can't sleep and I feel like it's turning me into another kind of person and I hate myself. And, when you start hating yourself, it's a really, really bad place to be because
right.
you just feel like you can't control it. You're in pain. It's making you into somebody you're not, because when you don't sleep and you have ongoing pain, I had gone up to my one particular time that I remember that was prominent during that period of time. I went up to Ohio to care for my father. He was 98 years old, and he needed help. He needed someone to stay with him, and at that point to help me get a good person to stay with him, home health care, and just provide for his general needs. So I was up there for a couple weeks, and it was during the time I was going through all the pain and the sleep problems, and I was helping him do something. It was just something minor, like changing a light bulb, but I got a horrible electrical shock. And,
Wow.
the timing was terrible because I went out in the garage and I just bawled because I said, God, I just can't stand this. And just anger, God, why are you doing this to me? And why am I still alive? And why didn't I die during the brain surgery? And of course, my father, I didn't want him to hear, but I went out in the garage and I just cried, because I was so broken at that point. And that night, in the middle of the night, I woke up and there was a light coming through the ceiling, and what I believed was an angel on the other side. And what that angel, the parents of that angel said to me, it was like a message from God telling me that there was hope and I was going to make it.
And how did that change you once you saw that angel?
Well, it was like God. It was kind of like the first time when I felt he rescued me when I was dying. That was the first time, but this was the second time, and it was like him giving me hope. And sometimes things don't make sense. I had a dream, and it was a very, very vivid dream that I was going to walk away from all the pain. And a lot of times we have dreams, we don't know what they mean. This was such a vivid dream, and I felt I was going to walk away from all this pain, and then around the same time, I fell down the stairs and I broke my ankle. And I said, God, this doesn't seem like I'm walking away from pain. I have a broken ankle. But that was during, the same time when I was experiencing all the fibromyalgia. And with fibromyalgia with me, in my case, I had some dizziness. And so I didn't walk well. And even though I went through months of learning how to walk after the initial brain surgery with the fibromyalgia, it was a different type of problem with the walking. I had dizziness. Wow. And so, when you're not holding on maybe as tight as you should be to the rail, you miss one step and then, you're all the way to the bottom. But yeah, I definitely had ups and downs with God. And, previously I can't say I've ever experienced that, but honestly, I do feel like because I cried out to him, I was honest. He knew my heart anyway, and he wanted the relationship. But it was his way of responding to me, both in the form of dreams and in physical rescue, but also then in sending me to Angel, that I believe that I probably might have never seen had I not been authentic and real with God.
Yeah, and there's something, too, about being authentic and real with him that enables you to get closer to him.
Definitely.
In a way that you don't when you're, like I said before, walking on eggshells, when you're trying to say you're fine when you're not.
And that's true. And, one thing that kind of prepared me and helped me, when I was going through the suffering, I had a minister that told me to read Psalms. And as I read Psalms, I realized, gosh, David had good days and he had really bad days too. And he felt like God had left him and was not there for him. And so I thought, if David can have that relationship, so can I.
Yeah, and I know there's a often misquoted Bible verse that says God's never going to give you more than you can bear. But
but he can come really close sometimes.
But that's not true. That verse is talking about temptation. He's not talking about suffering. And I think that God will give you more than you can bear, if for no other reason than to make you rely on him. If you can bear everything,
that's very true.
Then you're just thinking that you're doing it. Oh, I can do this. I can do that.
That is so true. And I'll tell you, my new theme verse became like 2 Corinthians 12:9. And what that section of Corinthians talks about is his power being perfected in our weakness. And in our weakness is when we feel his strength. And, I knew the verse, I can do all things through Christ, but this was different because I was so weak. And I always tell people I feel weak, even times now. I struggle, not like before. I mean, it's much, much better. But so many, many, many times during this recovery, I was so weak, and I feel it was only God that I got through those times, and that He was my strength, and He's still my strength. And, someone was asking me recently, about my dependence on God, and I said, I feel I don't have any choice because it's been so long now that I've needed Him, that I could not have lived this life without Him. And I've lost some things, like I've lost some memory, and I've lost my sense of smell. And, I've had a few health issues, but, much better than before. And, changing my diet, changing my exercise habits, and changing my style of living, my health has gotten much better. But it's not perfect. I have some remnants from the brain surgery and the fibromyalgia. But, the great thing is I know no matter what, He's there. If He can get me through all that, He can get me through anything.
Right. And it's that, we hate, I've been working on a blog about verses that Christians, that either aren't in the Bible and we think that are, or that we misinterpret. And I think a lot of people that are new to the faith, that come to the faith, and a lot of people also who fall away from the faith, do so because life happens. And they don't think that bad. Now that I'm a Christian, nothing bad is going to happen to me. And nothing could be further than from the truth. And
that's very true. That's so true. But I'll tell you one thing I learned, and I could never see any of it back then. Having written Supernatural Rescue and being an inspirational speaker now, and appearing on radio shows and podcasts, and having a pretty busy time as far as sharing with others, I would not have this story to tell. And honestly, what it talks about in the Bible, the suffering causing patience, perseverance, is true. But also, I think this, I thought this was about me. And now that I look back, okay, God got me through it, but it was about what I could share and what I could do to encourage other people. And I spoke for a group this past week, and it was a small group of maybe 40 women, a church group. But the amazing thing, so many people in that group had connections to brain tumors. And, there were a lot of tears, and there was a lot of sharing as a result of that. And that was really a God thing. Had I not been through this, I would not be able to encourage other people in the same way that I can now.
I can see that, because earlier this year I went through unemployment, underemployment, and a very difficult time. Fortunately, God saw me through, and I can point to the things that He did to help me to get to the point where I am now. And Friday, our church went to feed the homeless. And a man came up, and me and several other women talked to him, and he was waiting for disability. He had been denied, and he was going back to try to get disability. And I was able to share my story with him. I said, your blessing might not come the way you think it's going to come. I mean, I hope, you want disability, maybe it'll come that way, but maybe it'll come a different way. That's
a good point.
You don't know necessarily how your blessing is going to show up. And because that is so how true. It worked out in my life. But I could not have told him that had I not gone through it.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. And if somebody had told me when I was in pain and going through sleep problems and becoming what I thought was a very ugly person, because when you don't sleep and you have pain, if somebody could have said, all of this is going to be a blessing or turn out to be a huge blessing, I would have said, you're crazy.
Yeah, I might have knocked them out.
God works. God's ways are higher than our ways. We can't understand how God works. And sometimes there again, like in my situation, I can look back in retrospect and see that. But during that time, I couldn't see it.
Right. And two, it's not up for us to see it. That's why true. We go through all this, because at some point you just have to say, Lord, it's on you. I mean, right before things turned around on me, I had no money. I had to literally go to the church to get money for groceries.
Oh, wow.
And that had never happened to me before. And then I come home from Bible study and I have no hot water. And so,
Oh, no.
and someone's telling me, oh, you need a new water heater. I'm like, are you kidding? This is like 4 years old. And so I literally went to an interview, took a cold shower and got dressed. And I didn't even apply for this job. They found me on LinkedIn.
Wow.
And, you know, it gave me more money than I thought I could make. It's an excellent opportunity, but I didn't go looking for it.
God just supplied it because he knew you needed it, right?
Yeah, I was just like, you know, after a certain point, after getting so many doors that I thought looked good closed in my face, I was like, you know what? Whatever you want to do, however you want to handle this. I don't know. I can barely see to the end of my nose. You can see miles down the road. You created the road. So whatever you want to do, you do. And you know, we don't know why necessarily. And in your case, you were able to see why afterwards, but there are some things that we will never know the answer to.
That's a very good point. And that, you know, that is very, very, very true. And, you know, the whole thing, why do bad things happen to good people? And then sometimes it doesn't make sense. Or I felt for the longest period it didn't make sense. Now I understand, you know, I understand now, but for some people, they might not see that in their lifetime. But, you know, the way God works is so mysterious, and he can affect people in ways that we don't see, we don't understand. And, you know, I do believe sometimes we go through things that's for somebody else, and maybe we never even see that.
Yeah, we do. You like
your faith. Just what you were talking about with God supplying your need, it took faith for you to say that in that situation. A lot of people wouldn't have that kind of faith, though, that you had.
I mean, if you're going to trust God, you have to get to the point where you actually trust him. And it becomes more than lip service.
Right.
You have to really say, okay, you're in control. I'm not. And that's hard for a lot of people.
Definitely, especially people that have a little more, you know, desire to be in control, or their temperament is more that type of temperament that likes to control things.
Yeah, and a lot of churches nowadays, you know, think that God is like a genie. God, I want you to do this. So this is what I need you to do. But that's not how God works.
No, not at all.
You know, and you mentioned David. I'm getting my Old Testament people confused, but he gave Joseph all of these great things that were going to happen to him. And what did they do? They ticked off his brothers. He ends up, you know, in a ditch. He gets sold to the Egyptians. You know, he ends up in jail. I mean, it doesn't seem like things are going to go well for him for a while.
But, no, and that's very true. And you look at all the apostles in the New Testament, the suffering and so forth, and some of them did die for the faith, you know, but there was a reason, you know, and what we read in the New Testament is so inspirational. But yeah, they had to suffer, and it wasn't necessarily a good ending for them at all.
No, and I think we have to be able to, as Christians, accept that suffering and realize that because they're suffering does not mean that God is not there.
That's very true. And I'll tell you one thing that I experienced that I never expected is when I found out I had my brain tumor. And I think I didn't really completely answer your question earlier, but for some people, when I told them I had a brain tumor, and this is very, very sad, they just walked away. And particularly a group that I was involved in, which was a group that I would not have expected this. I said, I just need a ride. Can you pick me up? And I didn't hear anything from anybody, but it made me feel sad because, first of all, I didn't know if I was going to make it, but I felt like I had a contagious disease and something, if they were around me, they were going to catch it. And it was very hurtful. And I know that they didn't mean that intentionally. And when I brought it up once at a later time, someone said to me, but we didn't know what to do. And I said, but when someone's alone and you walk away and they're alone in their pain and suffering and you walk away, they feel even lonelier. Sometimes it's just a matter of being with them, not providing any answers because no one has the answers. But, even people that are Christian, sometimes, quote, they don't know what to do, but walking away is one of the worst things. When you feel alone, in your pain and suffering.
But having suffered from depression and actually being a suicide survivor, there are times when I just need you to be there. I don't need you to have the best Bible verse or the best quip or comeback to say or to do this great thing to change things. I just need you to be there. I just don't want to be alone.
No, I understand that too. My family, several people in my family have had a history of depression, and my depression after the brain surgery was totally different. Basically, I just cried every day, and I didn't even really know why I was even crying, but I had a hole in my head, and I was really messed up. So it's a different kind of depression than what I had earlier. But, it is such a common problem, and unfortunately, it's something else that's very misunderstood, that and anxiety and fear, that's very misunderstood. And I've heard preachers say, well, if you have faith, you won't have fear, but they don't really understand the ramification of fear and how bad anxiety can be.
Right. And it's like I mentioned earlier, it's a great thing to say, but it doesn't necessarily translate into something that's viable or believable for people that are going through it.
Yes, definitely. And the truth is, sometimes we're quick to judge people, and unless you've walked in their shoes, you shouldn't judge people because it's wrong. And it talks about judgment in the Bible, and he who is without sin cast the first stone. Sometimes, people could have looked at me when I was miserable and really judged me. And I don't know, maybe they did. No one, said it to my face, but I did become an ugly person when I had the fibromyalgia and I hated myself. But it was so much pain and so much lack of sleep, and I didn't think I could stand it. It was just horrible. And so unless you've been through that kind of pain, sometimes it's easy to judge people not having any idea what they're going through.
Right. And I know I felt that when I was really getting depressed and reaching out to people for help and hearing, oh, but you're so strong. I'm like, understand, I'm trying to tell you right now, I'm not, but that was something that people thought they needed to say, and.
Well, and part of that, I believe, it might have been a compliment because they might have seen the strength in you in the past, but, people there again that have not experienced what you were experiencing, they couldn't understand it. And so they couldn't put words to it. They were trying to make you feel better, but that didn't make you feel better.
No, it didn't. But, I think we as people, not just Christians, but as people, need to get over that desire that we all have to come in and save the day. Sometimes you're not going to save the day. Sometimes you just need to be present. Now,
I completely understand it. Even when I was a therapist, and I have a PhD in psychology, nobody has all the answers. People come to a counselor thinking, you're going to help them solve everything. But honestly, sometimes it's one of those things. It will come to you. I mean, it will be revealed to you what you need to do, or it'll be revealed through a book, or it might never be revealed, or you might never have a complete understanding. But, we can't fix other people's problems, and I don't think God ever intended that we should completely fix them. He's a healer. He wants to be present. He wants his presence in our life to change things. And I think if we allow that, and part of it is just being honest with him, if we allow him to be a part of our life, the good, the bad, and the ugly, it doesn't mean we'll have a perfect life, but it definitely will be that we'll have a relationship with him. And, God created us for fellowship, as you said, and that's what he wants. He wants relationship. He wants fellowship no matter what we're going through.
And as you were talking, I kept thinking about how God often compares us to little children or
yes.
to a flock of sheep. And in both cases, you don't necessarily know where that, shepherd is leading you. You don't understand everything your parents do, but you trust them. You trust their guidance. You know that they love you. You know that they have the best interest for you. So even if you can't say, okay, well, this happened because of X, Y, and Z or A, B, and C. You know that, you trust them. And I think that's ultimately what God wants. He wants us to put our trust in him. I mean, you don't
Definitely.
go to your parents and say, I need to know every reason why. You just know that, okay, well, this is what they said. I might not like it.
And that they love you. They love you, even though they don't have all the answers. That's true.
Okay, so as we wrap this up, I found your verse, 2 Corinthians 12:9. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest in me. And that's what we were talking about earlier. When you're going through a difficult time, that is your weakness. And that's when the Lord can show his strength. If we didn't have those weak moments, we would think it was all us.
Exactly. That's so true. That is so true. And if we had it all together, we wouldn't need God, would we?
No, we wouldn't. And when we get more than we can bear, which God will give us, in the form of a tumor sometimes, in the form of joblessness, whatever it is, he's doing that so that we rely on him. And when we come through it, we know who brought us through it.
Exactly.
And it wasn't the person staring back at us in the mirror.
That's so true.
Well, Linda, it's been great having you on the show. I'm going to put a link to your ballroom dancing.
Oh, that's very sweet. Did you found a testimony on my website?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a very powerful testimony, and not everybody reads books, and so I appreciate you doing that because that does tell the story of what I've been through, and from going from a place where I couldn't walk, several times, to where I could celebrate God's love through dance. That, to me, that was one of the most powerful things, and I'm grateful for my instructor, for Eddie Rivera, to choreograph that. And thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate that.
No problem. It's been my pleasure talking to you. It's been my pleasure talking to you, Linda. And I really have gotten a lot out of this, and I think my listeners will too, because it's such a powerful and personal testimony. And I thank you for coming on my show to share it.
Thank you. Thank you. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share. And there again, going from such horrendous situation to a point that I can encourage and inspire other people, it means all the world to me. And I'm really very appreciative of the opportunity of being on your show.
All right. Well, I'm going to end it on that note. And I'm going to tell you, dear listener, that until next time, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Bye-bye.